Okay guys, so in this lecture we are going to cover the topics of multi-sub-object materials in 3ds Max. And a multi-sub-object material is just a material that allows you to take one watertight polygon mesh, and that's just one polygon mesh that's all one object. It doesn't have any elements or separate pieces. And you can assign different materials to that watertight mesh via using the polygon ID channels. That'll be the first thing. The next thing I'd like to discuss will be the materials library and how you can keep using that to store all the materials that you're creating for your scenes. After that we'll get into UVW Map modifier and some of the more advanced settings. And then after that we'll do tileable texture maps, and then we will go deeper into tweaking some values of materials, and then the next topic will be actually doing custom UV layouts. Alright, so let's get started. It came up in class, someone said that they wanted to take their room and have it have different materials, so different material for the floor, the ceiling, and the walls. And the way that we're going to do that is with a multi-sub-object material. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select my room layer here, or my room object, and I'm going to right click and say hide unselected. And so I just got my room only available here. And then I want to point something out. If you make sure your object, so your room and walls, is an editable poly, if you go over here into, you have to be in a sub-object mode. In this case I'm going to go into polygon mode, and if you go over here to this section right here, polygon material IDs right there. So if I start selecting polygons, you'll notice here that there'll be a number here, so set ID, select ID, and then down here smoothing groups. When you do select a polygon that is associated with the number, I'll try the floor here, there we go. When I click on the floor, it'll light up here the 2. When I click on the ceiling, it's going to light up here on the 3. And when I click over here on the right wall, it's going to light up 5. And then I got to stay inside because that's where I want to do this. And then on the left wall, you can see here that it changes to a 7. And then finally, if I go to my back wall, there it is, it has a 4. Alright, and so those are kind of the important numbers. If you'll notice, every polygon, or almost every polygon, is assigned a number. Alright, and those are going to be important when it gets into sub-object materials. So what I'm going to do here is I like to devise a system whenever I do anything, and my system is going to involve just always naming or having the same numbers for these objects so that I kind of always know what channel is what. And so for a 4-walled room with a ceiling and a floor, I'm going to come up with a method of always having my floor have the ID value of 1, okay? And currently you can see here that my floor actually has a 2. So I'm going to go over here to this. Okay, so I have the floor selected, and I'm going to assign the number 1 to the floor. So I'm going to just select the polygon here that represents the floor, and I'm going to click right here under the polygon smoothing groups. I'm going to click on 1 to assign the value of 1 to the floor. Alright? The next one I'm going to do is the ceiling. So I'm always have my floor be number 1. I'm always going to have my ceiling be number 2. So I'm going to come over here and set my ceiling value, or ID, to a 2. And then my front wall, the wall that my camera is predominantly looking at, I'm going to make a 3. And so I have to notice, I have to select all the polygons associated with that wall, including the polygons on the windowsill here. And then I'm going to assign those to the value of 3. Alright? And then I'm going to come back here. I'm just going to start moving right. And so my right wall, I'm going to give a value of 4. and then I'm going to keep going around here to the back, and my back wall I'm going to give a value of 5. Okay, and then finally I'm going to come over to the left wall, and I'm going to give that a value of 6. Alright, okay, so now what I can do to assign different materials to these walls, and maybe I'll frame my floor here and zoom into the room a little bit so we can see all our walls. What I need to do is I need to assign a material called a multi-sub-object material. So I'm going to open up my material editor, and I'm going to just wipe everything that's in there right now, and I'm going to create a standard material. So right here out of the materials list, I'm going to click to open up standard, and I'm going to create this one right here, the multi-sub-object material. I'm going to double click that guy, and if you'll notice, I'm going to hit the Z key to frame it, and then I'll double click it to open it up in the materials editor. It has all these ID channels here, and currently they're all set to none. So all these are, they're basically inputs, the 1 through 10 here, and those values are assigned to the values that I just assigned to my polygon objects. So for example, if I wanted to do a wood floor for, say, the floor here, that was on channel 1, and so I'm going to go ahead and go into my custom material library here, and I'm going to grab a material that I've already made, and it's called Joel's Hardwood, and I'm going to double click that guy. It's going to bring it into the Slate browser here, and all I have to do is just click on this little circle and drag its input to the circle next to the 1, and then if I want my material to show up inside the interface here, because it actually has a texture map, I actually have to come over here and click on the little light bulb. Alright, and then after doing that, if I assign the material now to my room here, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to right click on it and say assign material to selection. If I pop back over here, we can see here that my wood texture is now on the floor. Now the problem is that wood texture is very large right now. And so one of the downsides to this multi-sub-object material editor, or material, is that you just kind of have to remember that you're assigning the materials to the sub-object or the polygon face. Alright, and so what that means is that I actually have to apply a UVW coordinate to each individual group of polygons. So in order to affect the change of that wood texture, which is way too large, I actually have to add a UVW modifier, but I can't add the UVW modifier to the global object, because each one of these walls is going to receive a different material, and so I'm going to want them to have individual mapping coordinates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that floor polygon again, and I'm going to go to the modifier list, and I'm going to add a UVW map. Alright, now that I've done that, I can go into the UVW gizmo, and I'm going to get out of sub-object mode. If I go to the gizmo, because that's assigned to that polygon, I can change the mapping coordinates here to, I think I'm going to try real world. There we go. That actually worked pretty good. And then what I can do is I'm going to change it back to planar, and then I'm going to go ahead and scale this down and also rotate it, so that I kind of want my floor laid at a 45-degree angle. So I'm going to hit the R key here for scale. I want to kind of change the width of the planks here first and foremost, and then next I want to rotate. So I'm going to rotate these guys 45 degrees, so they're a little bit more dynamic and on the diagonal. Okay. Alright, now what I want to do is I want to change my walls to different paint colors. And I've already got a few paint colors in here, kind of pre-programmed, so I'm going to go ahead and open up my materials editor, and I still have my multi-sub object material. I've got a hardwood assigned to the number 1 channel, which is assigned to the floor. I kind of drag that up. And then I want to grab some paint colors. So I want to grab my white. So I have a white paint color in here somewhere. Okay, so I got my white paint color here. And if you'll remember, I assigned the floor was channel 1, the ceiling was channel 2, the front wall with the window was channel 3, and then everything else was all the other channels, I believe, to 6. So what I need to do is, if I want all the walls but the front wall to be white, I'm going to grab this white wall color here, and I'm going to assign it to channel 2 for the ceiling. I'm going to assign it to channel 4 for the right wall, 5 for the back wall, 6 for the left wall. Alright? And then I want to do an accent wall, and so I'm going to grab another wall color here, and this one is my wall paint mint eggshell, and I'm going to go ahead and drag that one into the 3 channel, which again was assigned to my front accent wall. So if I've done this all correctly, and it looks like I have, I should have white walls everywhere. I think the ceiling just looks black because of the lighting. And then I have a minty accent wall for the front. So I'm going to check that in a render. I'm going to go and right click and say unhide all. And I just want to check and see how I did. So I'm going to go ahead and click on render, and then I'll pause it so you guys don't have to wait through this, but right now it's just computing my final gather points, and then once that's complete, then I'll get kind of this refresh where it kind of looks like ink blots or pointillism, and then once that's done, we will have a rendered image. So I'm just going to wait until it updates so you can see the kind of pointillist effect here. And then now we're computing the final gather points, so now I'm going to pause it so you don't have to. Okay, so that looks pretty decent, although I kind of don't like how light my floor color is. I was hoping to do a darker wood color. And so I want to show you something that's kind of cool if you're using the mental ray wood floor material. By default, that comes with the mental ray materials down here. So it's just the standard Autodesk hardwood. Interesting little feature is if you double click the map that gets plugged in, so that's the wood grain texture. If you notice here, we have a brightness value that's currently set to 100. So I can actually change how dark my floor is by just tweaking this value instead of having to open the image up in Photoshop and darken it there. So it's kind of very, very useful. So I'm going to set this to a lower value, like a 10, and I'm hoping to get a deep, dark hardwood. So I'm going to go ahead and render that again, and I'm hoping it's going to look a little bit closer to what I'm going for. Okay, so that's a little bit closer to what I'm looking for. Maybe not perfect yet, but at this point I can live with it. So I'm going to move on to the next element. The other thing I did while I paused the video is I changed all of my render settings down to low, their lowest values. Things were taking a little bit longer than I liked for things to render. And so while we're just kind of trying to get everything laid out, it's a good idea for you guys to keep your render settings as low as possible. I like to just use all the low values here, and then you don't spend any unnecessary time waiting for long, high-quality renders when you're still just kind of tweaking color values and whatnot and trying to get things to look right. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to texture map my rug here. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I want to so I want to add a rug texture to my rug element here. So I'm going to select the rug, and I'm going to right click and say hide unselected. right click and say hide unselected, and I just want to isolate the rug here so that I can assign a texture coordinates to the rug. Alright, so before we can wrap an image onto a 3D object, we need to first establish 2D coordinates on our object for on our 3D object for our 2D image to be mapped to. And the way we do that is by assigning a modifier by the name of UVW. So I'm going to just type U to get to the U's. UVW Map. Alright? So I have my UVW Map modifier assigned to my rug element here. And I'm going to go to the gizmo because the gizmo is the actual mapping coordinates for your object. And so the mapping coordinates come in a broad variety. The first of which is planar. And so planar is basically just that. It's a plane, and it kind of just projects your 2D coordinates from a vector, so in this case it would be the z-axis, straight down onto this rug. And to help visualize this, I'm going to actually assign a material to my rug here. And so I already made a rug material, and then I'm going to show you how it works after I assign it. So there's my rug material. I'm going to say assign material to selection, and there we go. So I got my rug on my object. I'm going to hit F4 so that we don't have to look at the edge spaces here. And so the gizmo on the UVW modifier allows you to kind of change the way the coordinates are actually positioned on your object. So if I move it, I can actually move my rug texture left and right. I can move it back to back, and you can see how it's kind of tiling on itself. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. But you can also scale. So if I hit the R key for scale, I can actually scale the map down, so I can add more and more tiles if I wanted to. And you can also just automatically select the object and then come over here under the UVW Map attributes, and currently have it on planar, and I can just click on fit, and fit's basically just going to expand the mapping coordinates to whatever the extents of your object are. So in this case, just the extent of my rectangular rug shape here. Alright, we also have cylindrical, and cylindrical, the way you want to think of these mapping coordinates is you want to kind of match the shape of the mapping coordinate to the shape of your object. So cylindrical would be for mapping things that are more cylindrical. If you'll notice here, cylindrical has an option here for cap. So if I click on the cap, what's going to happen is it's going to change the way this top panel here maps onto the object, and it's going to map it more in a planar fashion, rather than if you turn off cap, it's actually going to do more of a spherical projection, which, as you can see, that could be useful for certain things, but for this rug it would be terrible. But we wouldn't really want to use a cylindrical map on this anyway, so I just kind of want to demonstrate what all these are. We have spherical, which you would use to map things that are, again, more spherical in shape. And maybe if I just create some standard primitives so I can illustrate these, that would be great here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sphere, and I'm going to create a cylinder, and then I'm going to assign this material to those objects. So I'm going to grab my rug material here, and I'm going to right click and say assign material to selection. Alright, and now we can kind of cycle through the UVW parameters a little bit better. So I'm going to select my spherical object, and I'm going to go into the UVW map, and I'm going to grab a UVW modifier, and I'm going to change this one to spherical, and you can see that that's actually going to map kind of correctly for a sphere. Really, it's really hard to get these correct. These are called the poles, and no matter what image you put on there, it's always going to distort unless it's been undistorted for the purpose of spherical projection. Alright, so I'm going to add a UVW modifier to my cylinder here, and I'm going to click on cylindrical. And here we can see that it's mapping very well all the way around the cylinder, but when it comes to the top, that's where it's starting to smear. And this would be where that cap setting would come in handy, because it would cap the top in kind of a planar fashion, and the bottom as well, depending on the object that you're mapping. The next one down is shrink wrap. We're really not going to get into that today. We have box, and so box works on a broad variety of objects. So if I click on box, see, even on a cylinder it's going to work pretty decent. The only downside to a box is it's going to divide whatever the object up into kind of 4 sides for the box, and then you're going to end up with these weird transitions sometimes. So that can be a little problematic, but it can also work in your favor from time to time. We have face. Face is just going to map the texture map in its entirety to each polygon face on the object, and then the X, Y, Z to UVW, we're not really going to get into that. So today we're mainly going to use either planar, cylindrical, or box to map all the objects in our scene. And you'll find that, you know, for the broad variety of stuff that you're going to be texture mapping in an architectural space, those 3 are going to work pretty well. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and delete these 2 guys, our little helpers here, and I'm going to go back to my rug. And for the rug, I want to use a planar, so I'm going to leave it at planar. And then to make my life easy, I'm just going to say fit, and so it's going to fit that planar map to the extent of my object. One downside is here you can see, because my rug is kind of catty corner, or off at an angle a little bit, we're missing kind of this little ridge here, or the kind of border on the actual rug itself. And so I can fix that very simply by just going into rotate mode, and I'm going to rotate this just like the gizmo, so I'm going to rotate the mapping coordinates on the UVW map just a little bit, just a hair. And I got to turn off my snapping to do that, but here we go. There we go. So I just want to see a little bit of that rug border on both sides, so that it didn't look like it was kind of smearing off to the edge. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and accept the changes, and I'm going to right click and say unhide all. And then, as usual, whenever we texture map something, we want to take a pretty shot of it, so I'm going to go ahead and render it. Okay, and so that looks pretty decent, so I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And I'm going to move on to my next object, which is going to be this lampshade here. So I'm going to go in here and select my lampshade. And I'm going to hit the Z key to frame the selection, and so we can kind of see in here. Alright, so again, when we map anything, we need to first select the object, go into the modifier list, and establish some UV coordinates. So I'm going to hit the U for UVW Map. I'm going to assign a UVW Map modifier, and then because this drum shade here is kind of cylindrical, I am going to use a cylinder. There's no reason for me to use a cap on this one because it has no top and it has no bottom, so it doesn't, it's immaterial here what I do. Alright, so I'm going to open up my material browser, and I'm going to grab a material that I already made for this, and so it should be in here called Joel's Lampshade somewhere. There we go. Joel's Mod Fabric. So I'm going to grab that from the material library, drag it down here. I'm going to hit the Z key to frame the selection, and I'm just going to go ahead and right click and say assign material to selection, and there we go. We've got my material in here, and now I want to talk a little bit about how I made this material. Alright, so if you'll notice here, when I go to the UVW map and I select the gizmo and I hit the R key for scale, when I scale this map up and down, it tiles seamlessly, and that's no accident. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop, and I want to show you how I made this. Alright, so I started with this image right here, which I found off the internet. And if I were to map this directly to the texture map in its present state, I just want to show you what I would get. So I'm going to select this material here. I'm going to open up my material editor, and I'm going to change the bitmap input to the unedited version of this image. So I'm going to come over here to the bitmap input, and I'm going to select this mod pattern JPEG and assign that by double clicking, and look what happens. At the borders here, at the repeats, we kind of get this break in the pattern, which doesn't really look that great. It doesn't look like what you would want it to when you tile the pattern. Alright, and so what I need to do is I need to make this image so that it will repeat seamlessly without having this kind of castle top stair step effect right there. Alright, so I just want this to seamlessly repeat. So I'm going to come over here into Photoshop, and I want to introduce you guys to a filter. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to paint some numbers, and I'll just do it in red. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then I'm going to go into this filter here, which is very useful for making tileable patterns, and I'm going to say filters, other, offset. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just start playing with the pixel values. I like to do this kind of one at a time, and so I accidentally entered that. So I'm going to say filter, other, offset, and I want to just work on the horizontal tiling at first. So I'm going to leave the vertical alone, right? And I'm going to come over here to the slider, and I'm going to start pulling the value. And if you'll see here, the 2 and the 4 went from the edges of the frame to being right next to each other. So what this filter is doing is it's taking the edges of the image and it's mapping them, kind of wrapping them back inside on each other. And what that's useful for is because you can actually find the repeat if you do have a repeatable pattern, and then you can crop the image so that it will repeat. Alright, and so I want to show you how that's done. I'm just going to delete that layer because I don't really need it. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look for the repeat in this pattern. So I'm just going to start first horizontal, or I'm going to start first vertically. And so if we look at these little black designs here, it looks to me like if I just crop the image so that I cut one of these guys in half, basically. So I'm going to come in here, and then I'm going to cut this one in half, that if I do that, so if I hit Control C, and then Control N for a new image, and then Control V, that if I now go into Filters, Other, Offset, and I change the horizontal value only, we can see here that no matter what I put in there, that pattern is continuing to repeat without any artifacts whatsoever. So I've kind of got the horizontal repeat licked here, and so I'm going to go ahead and take that back to 0 and say OK. And now I want to crop the image so that I have the vertical pattern established as well. And so it looks like if I come in here to the middle of this little bar here, so again, I like to use the middles of things because that's where it kind of cleanly, you can find you get the cleanest tile. So I'm going to come to the middle of the one on the top, and then the middle of, actually it's going to be the one on the bottom here. I don't believe I can go into the other one. And then I'm going to hit Control C to make a copy, Control N for a new image, and then Control V. And I actually made a mistake there. I knew it when I did it. Alright, so I'm going to select this one at the middle, and then this one down here at the middle. And I'm going to hit Control C, Control N for a new image, and then Control V. And then now if I go into that filter, other, offset, and I start playing with the values, we already knew that horizontally it worked, and so now I'm checking for vertical, and no matter what I plug in here, it's still repeating seamlessly. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just leave that at 0, because I know it works, and I'm going to say OK. And now what I have is a repeatable tile. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Shift Save, and I'm going to call this guy Mod Pattern Tile 02. And then I'm going to save it out. It's important that you guys save your images in a lossless format. If you use JPEGs in your projects, every time you save that JPEG, you're going to introduce more and more artifacts, which is going to make the image kind of more and more noisy. And so I recommend using a lossless format. My favorite is TIFF. So I'm going to use a TIFF. I don't want to save the layers, so I'm going to discard the layers. I don't want any compression, and I'm going to say OK. Alright, and then now I can come back into 3ds Max, and I can go to my material editor. I'm going to double click that bitmap, and now I'm going to link to that image I just made, which was Mod Pattern Tile 02. And then now, thing of beauty, we have the pattern and it repeats nicely. And now I can kind of go for the repeat that I'm looking for. But if you'll notice something, we were able to change the tiling of the rug by simply scaling the image. But if you'll notice on the cylindrical map, it's not really working. It's kind of distorting. And if I do it scale all axes simultaneously, it's kind of giving me this weird looking result. Alright? And so that's due to the nature of the way a cylindrical map works. So I'm going to click on Fit so I get no distortion, because I don't want that pattern to distort at all. If you want to repeat a cylindrical map, you actually have to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to open up the material editor, and I'm going to double click that bitmap. And the way that you change the repeat for a cylindrical map is actually through the textures tiling parameters. So if you'll notice here, it says U and V, and then there's a tiling value. And I currently have it set to 16 and 4. Alright, so watch what happens when I change this to just 1 and 1. It's basically just my texture tile and stretched completely around that cylinder. And so if I change it to 2 here in U, you can see here it's getting close to what I'm looking for. So what you want to do is you just kind of keep increasing the value until you get it to look like what you want. So I definitely want that to be square. So I'm going to change that to 5. That's pretty good. And so my ratio is basically 5 to 1 if I want this thing to be square. So if I want to have twice as many of these guys around the cylinder, I have to change this to 10. And then if I want twice as many up and down, I have to change this to 2. So the V value. So I'm going to go to 2. And then I actually want that packed a little bit tighter, because I'm going for a little bit tighter feel there. So I'm going to change this to, I think I'll do 20 to 4. There we go. That looks pretty good. That's what I'm after. And then I also didn't like the image the way it was, so I went ahead and inverted it. And so I'm going to grab another version of it where I actually turned it black, and that's what I'm after. Alright, cool. So I got my texture map and I have it repeating, and so now would be a great idea for me to go ahead and render it within the context of my scene a little bit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the way that looks for now, and my lampshade on the other side is pretty much identical to the one on the left, so all I'm going to do here is I'm going to select my other lampshade. Got to get out of the UVW map and select my other lampshade, add a UVW Map modifier to it, and then the cool little feature of the UVW Map modifier is if I select it for the lampshade I just created it for, if I scroll down here under the parameters, I can actually click on this little button right here under alignment, the very bottom one, very last one, called acquire. And so I'm going to click that, and it makes it very easy. All I have to do is come over here to the UVW coordinates for this map, which are already laid out perfectly, and click on it, and then it's going to pop up this little box, and it's going to say acquire absolute and acquire relative. So if I clicked on acquire absolute, what it would do is it would actually use the coordinates on this object over here on this one. If I do relative, it's actually going to assume the properties of this one but place it on top of that one. So I'm going to do acquire relative, and then I need to assign that material to that object. So I'm going to say assign material to selection, and there we go. I got both my lampshades texture mapped. Always want to render to check your work, see how it looks. Okay, so that's looking pretty good, so I can move on to the next object. Next piece of furniture in my scene that I want to texture map is my couch. And so I want to just add a micro suede texture to this couch. So I'm going to come over here into my perspective viewport, and I'm going to hit Q, and I'm going to select my couch. Alright, so I'm going to start with my couch, and I'm going to start with the end piece here. And so I've got my couch broken into all these different pieces, as it is a good idea to do that when you're modeling for photorealism. It just looks a lot better. So I'm going to select my couch arm here, and I need to add a UVW modifier here to it. So I'm going to add a UVW map. And then because this piece here is essentially boxy, I'm going to click on box, and then I'm going to say fit. So then I'm going to fit that right around my end piece there. And then I want to make this couch look like micro suede. So I'm going to go into my material editor, and I'm going to grab a material that I already made here. And so there it is, Joel's micro suede. So I'm going to go ahead and double click that. And then I'm going to double click the material to open it up in the material editor. And I'm going to grab the bitmap that is plugged into the diffuse color. So I'm going to go ahead and check that out. And let's talk a little bit about how I made this one. So the material that I'm using is micro suede cafe light, and I'm going to open that one up in Photoshop. Alright, so I have my material open up here in Photoshop, and if I zoom in on it, it's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on, but if I zoom in on it, it's just kind of a light micro suede texture. And what I want to do is I just want to check to make sure that this texture is actually going to tile correctly. And so if you remember, we're going to do that by going to Filter, Other, Offset, and then I'm just going to play with the values here. So I'm going to do a horizontal offset. If you offset it and you can't see a repeat, which I currently cannot, then you've essentially hit the lottery, because you don't need to do anything to it. Alright, so I'm tiling this and I really don't see any effect whatsoever, and so therefore I can just go ahead and use this one as is. So every once in a while you luck out like that. I just wanted to kind of illustrate that you don't have to tile every map you get, only the ones that don't repeat well. So if it repeats and you can kind of see the repeat, then you've got to fix it. But in this case, I cannot see any repeat, so I'm going to just go ahead and use this one as is. I am going to save it, however, as a TIFF, because my original was a JPEG, so I'm going to go ahead and save it as Micro Suede Cafe Light TIFF. Alrighty, and then I'm going to come back over here into my bitmap, and I'm going to reassign the TIFF version, and then now I'm going to go ahead and texture map that onto my sofa arm. So I'm going to right click and say assign material to selection, and then the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure I have the show bitmap, show shaded material in viewport, so I can actually see what it looks like in the viewport. And so I'm going to kind of zoom in here, and I'm just looking to see how my fabric pattern lines up. Is it getting too smeared? You can see here that at the margins, so at the corners of my couch end, we're kind of getting this smearing effect. And so what I want to do is I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to hit the R key for scale, and I'm going to get on the UVW Maps gizmo. And sometimes by just, on the UVW Maps gizmo, sometimes by just scaling that out a little bit to the sides, you can actually get rid of that. So I just kind of scaled it out to the sides, and then if I wanted to make the texture smaller or larger, I can just scale this up or down. I actually kind of like the way it looks right there, and so I might go ahead and do a render to just verify, see if it looks okay. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. It looks decent. Really, this type of a texture map is probably going to need a bump map or a displacement map, which we're going to get into a little later. But for now, I'm happy with that. It's kind of looking micro suede-ish, and so I'm going to go ahead and continue mapping all the other elements here. So wouldn't it be great if you're probably saying to yourself, well, why didn't he just assign a one single UVW map to all of these individual elements and then tweak them individually? And my answer to you on that one is, wow, that would be awesome if that's how it worked. Unfortunately, if you add a UVW map modifier to all of these couch pieces, it's going to treat them all as one under one mapping coordinate. So it would not really work for you that way. So what we have to do is we have to select the other couch piece, the other arm end here, and I have to go into the modifier list, and I have to also add a UVW map to it, and then I have to click on acquire, and then I'm going to acquire the coordinates from the other arm piece, and I'm going to say acquire relative and say OK, and then I can open up my material editor and say assign to selection, and now I have the arm end, both arm ends texture map. Alright, so then I'm going to go to the next piece, which is the couch cushion, and I'm going to add a UVW map modifier, and then I'm going to change it to a box, and I'm going to say fit, and then I'm going to assign that same material, so I'm going to say assign material to selection, and then I'm going to do the one behind it as well, so I'm going to say UVW map modifier, change it to box to match the shape, I'm going to say fit, so it'll fit the coordinates, and then I'm going to assign the material to selection as well, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a quick render to see how it looks. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I'm going to add UVW map modifiers to all of my components, and I don't really have to worry about changing anything because I'm going to use acquire on all of these. So I'm going to go to acquire, and I'm going to say acquire from there, acquire relative, and same thing for this one. I'm going to select the the UVW Map modifier, and I'm going to say acquire from the first one, relative, select this guy, hit UVW, add a UVW map. I'm going to say acquire, and acquire from the first one, relative. And then finally, I'm going to go into the UVW map modifier for this guy and say acquire, and acquire relative from that one. I can then select all of my pieces and go into my material browser and then right click and say assign material to selection. And then finally, I just have two more components that I need to map. So I'm going to say UVW map, and then I'm going to say acquire, and I'm going to acquire from this couch cushion, and then I'm going to assign the map. And this one is probably going to be a little stretched. Yep. And so this one I'm actually going to have to go in and tweak with the gizmo. So I'll then do a fit, and then I'll do a scale to kind of scale that down to the size of one couch cushion, which should give me a similar repeat to the cushions above. And that looks pretty good, as well as I might just scale it up slightly to get rid of that smearing effect that you sometimes get on the side. And then I'll go to the back of the couch, and I'm going to assign a UVW map modifier, and then I'm going to just go ahead and say acquire, and come around and acquire that from the front. And there we go, our entire couch will soon be texture mapped as I assign that final material to that final component. And looks pretty good. As always, I'm going to render it. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. So we're ready to do the last item in the room, and we're going to wrap this thing up. And so last item I want to do here is this table and the chair legs. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that, and we're going to go into tabletop piece here. And what it'd be tempting for me to use the wood floor here that I already used on the floor to texture map this tabletop, but I want to discuss that a little bit. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to grab my little eyedropper, and I'm going to grab that material for the floor. And so there it is, Jules hardwood floor texture or material. And I'll double click that to open it up, Jules hardwood. And watch what happens if I go ahead and right click and assign this to the tabletop. And then I will need to get the mapping coordinates for that tabletop, so I'm going to use the UVW map. And I'm going to actually do a box for this one. And then I'm going to say fit. And then what I like to do sometimes is I like to trick the software by clicking on this little real world coordinates button here. It'll automatically map this thing to its known set of parameters. And we can see here, and then I always just click it right back to standard box. And I actually didn't keep it this time. So I'm going to say real world coordinates, and you can see here that this thing kind of looks like a butcher block on top of the table, and that is not the look that I'm trying to go for. I actually want this to just look like one piece of like mahogany texture. And so because of that, I'm actually going to turn off the real world coordinates, and I want to swap out the material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another copy of this material here. And so I'm going to select it, and holding down the shift key, alright, so I'm going to make a copy of this hardwood material by holding down the shift key and dragging it off. So I just selected both of those, and then I'll just delete this real fast. So I selected both of these guys. I'm going to hold down the shift key and drag it off, and that's going to make a copy of that material. I'm going to double click on this real fast, and I'm just going to call this Joel's hardwood, or Joel's mahogany furniture. Okay, and then stain, I want none. I'm going to use that same semi-gloss varnish. I'm going to just change this box here where it says used for flooring to used for furniture. And then I want to swap out the map. So currently it's using that beechwood tiled kind of flooring or butcher block type material. And I want to swap that out with a custom material. So I'm going to go to my directory where I have all my images storage, which is right here in my project directory. And I'm going to go into my mahogany wood grain material. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to apply that guy. And then I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say assign material to selection, and I want to turn on the show the shaded material in the viewport. And then I'm going to go into the objects UVW Map, and I always just try this first. I'm going to click on real world coordinates and just kind of see what kind of tile it gives me. So it's tiling a little bit, and although it looks decent, we can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see it with the video compression on the internet, but I can see these patterns here where we can see the tile repeated. Alright, so I'm going to need to edit this, and so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and open this image up in Photoshop. So I'm going to open up this mahogany material here in Photoshop, and again I need to make this thing so that it will tile nicely. So the first thing you always want to do is you want to get rid of anything that's kind of a standout that's going to show up when you repeat it. And the first thing I see is these two little elements right here, these two little black spots. And so I'm going to go into the clone tool here in Photoshop, and I'm just going to get rid of those really fast. The next one I see is these kind of repeat patterns here, and so I'm going to go ahead and just take one of those guys out. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the filter, and I'm going to grab the offset filter. And again, I want to only do this in one value at a time, so I'm going to go ahead and do it horizontally first. And I always just try to get it somewhere in the middle. That's pretty good. Alright, and so we can definitely see the pattern there where we have the artifact. And so I think that this one's probably going to clean up pretty easily if I just use the clone stamp. And I clone from one side of this wood pattern to the other. So I'm going to take a sample here, and I'm just going to try to line it up as best I can, and then I'm just going to run a clone stroke all the way down through it. I might then also go and just kind of break up these parts where it's really, really pronounced. I'm just going to go in and break those up a little bit so that it's not so, I don't have any features that are so pronounced. I just want the overall wood grain. Alright, so I've got the horizontal fix, and now I'm going to go into filters, other, offset, and now I want to do the vertical. So I'm going to change the vertical here to trying to see if I can even see the seam. I actually can't see the seam, and so this is another case where I've kind of lucked out, and I don't really have to do anything. The other thing I can do, another little nifty trick that works sometimes is, it's probably a little known, is if you're creating a tileable map, there's another filter you can apply. So I'm going to go into filters and say other, and I'm going to apply this filter here called high pass. So I won't go into the math of what this thing actually does, but what it essentially does is it allows you to extract the features of an underlying pattern and kind of even the lighting out along the entire pattern. So so what you want to do is you want to pick a blur value here that is larger than the smallest detail that you want to retain from this image. And so that image was a little bit noisy, and so I'm going to do a very large blur value, and then I'm going to say OK. And you'll notice, well, why the hell did you do that? Because that's all washed out and white now. And what you can do, that basically just kind of evens the image out all the way on the whole. And then if you go over here under Edit, you can say Fade High Pass, and then it opens up this little dialog, and we can change the mode to luminosity, and then you can change the amount that the high pass gets faded in. And so just think of it as the high pass is kind of like a filter that just evens out this entire image. And so I'm going to fade in the high pass at about 50% in the luminosity channel. And then I'm going to hit Control L, and I'm just going to tweak the levels here a little bit to crunch the values down. And you can see here that the image, well, you might not be able to tell, but it has gotten more even overall. A final thing about this texture that I see is that it's kind of noisy. It's very, it looks like maybe whoever shot this picture might have over-sharpened the image. And so to counteract that, I'm just going to go in here to Filters, and I'm going to go into Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to blur this whole image by about a pixel, maybe even 2 pixels, I think it's 1.5. Split the diff. Alright? And then I'm going to go ahead and hit Control L one more time, and I just want to adjust the contrast on this. And I kind of want a little bit darker pattern, and so I'm going to say OK on that. And then finally I'm going to go into Filters, Other, and I'm going to test the offset one more time, this time both horizontal and vertical. And I just want to see if there's going to be any artifacts on the repeat, and there is not. So I'm going to say OK. And then finally, I'm not too mad about this color, so I'm going to hit Control-Shift-U, whoops, wrong one, Control-U to open up the Hue and Saturation dialog. And I want to just add a little bit more red to this image, so I'm going to skew it a little bit to the left here, get a little bit more red, and then I'm going to saturate it a little bit more, and then I'm going to darken it a little bit more. And I'm pretty happy with that now, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-S to save it. And I'm going to call this Mahogany Wood Grain Tile 02. And I'm going to save it out. Say OK. And then I'm going to come back here into 3ds Max, and I want to check my material. So I'm going to come into the map, and just want to make sure I have the right one. This is Joel's Mahogany Furniture. Okay, so I want to change the map here, and I'm going to grab that image that I just made, which is Mahogany Wood Grain Tile 02, and I'm going to save it out. And I'm noticing here that I have the brightness turned down because on my hardwood floor I had that brightness turned down, and because I copied this, it just copied the value. And so I want to make sure on this one, I actually thought the color I had on the table was decent. So I want to just make sure that I have a brightness value of 100% on this map. And you know what, I'm actually kind of digging that wood grain. It looks pretty decent. So at this point, I'm going to just go ahead and render an image to see. Okay, so you know what, I'm happy enough with that right now. It might be a little bit too red, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. And so now all that's left to do is for me to actually copy this to my remaining components of my table. So I'm going to add a UVW map on the bottom portion, and I'm going to say acquire. Select the top, say acquire relative. Make sure that I assign this material to my selected object. And then for the final two, I'm going to just pre-assign this, say assign material to selection. And then I need to add some UVW map mapping coordinates for each one of these. So looks like my first leg actually already had one. So I'm going to click on real world, and that actually worked pretty well. So I'm going to click on the next one. It already had a UVW Map modifier on it, and so I'm going to click on real world there again, and that looks pretty good. That's about what I was going for. And then all that is left to do now is to go ahead and do a higher quality render. So I'm going to open up my render setting, and I'm going to set everything to medium. Maybe not that one. And I'm going to go ahead and render it, and I'm going to see how I did. Okay, so that's it. Looks good enough for now. I'm happy with it. Now it's time for me to save my scene. I'm going to go into my material editor, and I'm going to make sure that I save all the materials that I made today by coming over here to the DM2 Project 1 mat library, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say get all scene material / maps, and I'm going to say get from scene, and I'm going to say replace items by name so that I don't end up with duplicates of the ones that I already have here. I'm going to say get. It adds the new materials that I just made today, and now I save my scene, and now my material library is also saved to my project directory, and I'm a happy camper, and that's it. In the next video we will go into doing custom UV layouts with the UVW Unwrap modifier. Alright, see you guys next time.